Hidden in the depths of the mind is a secret tomb where knowledge, fear, mystery, and a macabre sense of enjoyment is held. Each corner is resplendent with its own curiosities, and each curiosity appeals to a different soul. You're listening to The Crypt of the Unknown, a podcast that discusses the realms of the horrific and the fantastic in print, games, or on the screen. And now, introducing you to the Guardians of the Crypt, your tour guides. Here are Webb and Stefan J.D. Greetings, weary travelers, to the Crypt of the Unknown, a podcast where we discuss the horrific and fantastical, the fun and exciting. I am Webb, the Critical Android, and joining me for this episode, as he's here for every episode, my co-host and friend, Stefan J.D.
Hello, everyone.
How are you doing, good sir?
I am waking up.
You know what they say the best part of waking up is?
Folgers in your cup?
No, the best part of waking up is Batman.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. Batman and joining a cult.
Yes, specifically that one. I mean, that advertising campaign was used, I believe, from like 92 to 93. It was a short-lived campaign, but that was the advertising slogan. You can just hear, like, the group in the background, like they had that a cappella group. The best part of waking up is Batman in a cult. Oh, we need some serious help.
Yes, we do. I will be getting some here with my therapy and with you by doing this podcast.
Yes, and, well, the good part about this, I guess you could say, is that, this book is cathartic in many ways. We're going to dive into it here, but why don't you, because I know you, good sir, enjoy the background of comics just as much as you enjoy the actual presentation of them. So tell us a little bit about Batman the Cult.
All right, so Batman the Cult, there's a lot of things to go over, but I'm going to try and keep it short here. Bernie Wrightson, first off, is known as one of the greatest artists to do mystery and horror especially. You could just type in Bernie Wrightson in Google and look it up, and a whole smattering of things are going to come up. You're going to realize quickly how good he is at specifically the genre of horror. So Bernie Wrightson on a Batman comic doesn't make sense usually in that capacity, unless, of course, it's coming to this story, which has very horrific things in it. Jim Starlin, famously known and still relevant today because of the Marvel movies, created Thanos. So he's pretty well known in the comics world as well. The only backdrop thing about Bernie Wrightson that's kind of a negative in the comics world is that he actually never got any of his original art back in the day. That was kind of per the request of DC and Marvel back then. They would say, well, once you give us your art, it's ours. Since then, it's not that way anymore. It's changed a little bit. I'm pretty sure there's different types of contracts and everything, but Jim Starlin, Thanos creator, Bernie Wrightson, horror artist, coming together for a Batman book. It's an interesting mix. And not only that, but they chose to do it about a cult.
Yeah, that book gets its name from, or the series, I should say. It's been republished in trade paperback several times. The one that I got, which, good luck finding it at a decent price these days. I had to, scour the internet for a good price for it. You could probably actually find the individual issues for cheaper. But for myself, I've got one that was printed in, looks like 91. Or at least that's the copyright that was given. I don't know if, I'm trying to find if there's an actual printing date for the graphic novel itself embedded in here somewhere with the copyright. But every copyright in here just keeps pointing back to 1991. So...
I think, so yeah, it probably would be 91 because the original comic book came out in 88, and then I think it was reprinted again in 2009.
Yeah, I couldn't find the 2009 reprinting, I guess, but the one that I do have is in remarkably good condition, and it's got this beaten and, well, you can tell he's, ragged, Batman on the cover of it, and one of the first things that you'll notice if you do look at that kind of a cover is the artwork on this is really, really fascinating. So before we get into the story, I really want to discuss that. Because this is a very kind of raw artwork to it that is also, in many ways, when we get, like, just larger scale, like, not just close-ups on the faces. The faces actually kind of have they remind me kind of like the Dark Knight Returns kind of style. I'm trying to think of how to describe it, because the artwork isn't realistic, and the faces of a lot of the people are exaggerated kind of, there's an exaggerated kind of decrepitness to some of the faces that we see, like when they're interviewing citizens of Gotham. These people look like they've been through a lot. Whereas, like, newscasters, give it a recurring blonde newscaster who shows up all the time, well, her features are far more gentle on the eyes, I guess you could say. But in general, a lot of the people who are presented in this, even Bats himself, are not in a very good place. And the larger images of, like, the city landscapes, or when we get to see locations in general, there is almost like a watercolor kind of form to it, with the way that the colors kind of blend and bleed into each other. It's a goddamn work of art.
This would probably be even more colorful than Watchmen in some aspects. When Batman or anyone is out in the city and you're seeing the sky and everything, there could be a real good mix of, like, pinks and yellows and darkness mixed all together. It's not specifically, oh, it's daytime, so it's blue, it's nighttime, so it's gray, or it's black. Yeah, you're right. It's very, very colorful, and even the violence of the issues painted still is colorful. It's not even specifically red sometimes. It's still, again, like pinks, very, very neon colors.
Yeah, it fits with the kind of the time period, too, where the late 80s, early 90s kind of have that kind of a neon feel to it. But there's a scene, for example, where Batman is walking through one of the underground sewers, and it's done in blues and greens, which is not typical for that kind of setting, but he is wearing night vision goggles, so the green kind of fits for it. And then when we get into, like, there's a sequence also, there's like kind of a battle that takes place, and for the most part it's presented like a yellowish arena, but then as the action kicks up, it starts to turn blood red in the background, and it's the colors are more of almost like an emotional coloration as opposed to realistic, like to almost an extent of surrealism at times. It really is unlike anything I've really ever seen in a Batman comic, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I think one of the things people take for granted when they read comic books is that we could have 4 panels lined up together, and in the third panel the character could get angry. And in the first 2, the background's white, and the third panel it's just immediately red. And then maybe they cool down in the 4th panel, so it's like a lighter red. Those little tricks of color showing the emotions without the reader specifically knowing, it's just giving you that extra flavor thrown in there, which is very great. And the cult definitely plays on that in a lot of ways.
Not to mention the fact that when you're trying to create an uneasy atmosphere, which is really what this is doing throughout most of it, there's a very uneasy atmosphere through all of it, having that kind of surrealism and having unsteadiness in terms of the setting and the background really does immerse you in a kind of a world where you can't really find your footing, which also parallels something that Batman himself goes through in this story, considering what he is put through by the villain. And we'll get to that in a second here, but I just wanted to know if you had any other thoughts on the artwork itself.
Just again, that there are a lot of reasons in this story why they chose Bernie Wrightson. There's a lot of corpses, there's a lot of death, there's a lot of violence, there's a lot of blood, there's a lot of dark settings, specifically that most of the story takes place in the sewer. And we can make comparisons of that for so many things in different Batman media. If anyone's ever seen The Dark Knight Rises and Bane's in the sewer in that movie, that's actually all taken from the cult. Bane and his whole group in the sewer. Batman Returns, Penguin in the sewer. Again, taken from the cult. So there's a lot to unpack here. Bernie Wrightson's art, though, was the perfect choice for this. And we'll get into even more why later on.
Yeah, and I think right now it's a good jumping off point to launch into the story. And in my edition of it, there is a foreword that's written by Starlin, where he is talking about the atmosphere in which this book was written. And he's specifically referring to the late 1980s into the early 90s kind of political correctness wave that was happening. But not the kind of, like, positive political correctness of, like, you know, trying to make sure that minorities aren't being, like, targeted for harassment and being denied jobs. No, we're not talking about that kind of political correctness. We're talking more about the censorship of art and media by people who think that morals should be imposed onto it. By morals, they specifically mean a specific set of morals is dictated by a specific few, mostly the religious right, or the conservative right, however you want to define them. So Starlin talks about how, you know, they had the comics code back in the day, and there was only so much you could do with violence for a while in comics. And how back in the early days of comics, you could get away with practically anything. Like with the, I think he specifically notes, the EC comics, which were steeped in horror. And he loved those things, absolutely loved them. The government did not, and they were, you know, blaming them for, like, corrupting the American youth, and all that stuff. Starlin was not a fan. And when the restrictions started easing up after the 60s and into the 70s and finally into the 80s, you could do a lot more with story arcs, you could do a lot more with violence, and you could do a lot more with these characters. So, I guess the progression of that into freedom of speech started to get rescinded again into the 80s. What with people like Tipper Gore, you and I would both know about that when it comes to the music industry, and what Tipper Gore did with that.
Oh yeah, she basically got her name for trying to take it on.
Right. And when you have that kind of environment that's affecting one form of media, very rarely does it stay in that realm. It starts to bleed out into other things. And that's what we got to see in the late 80s and early 90s. So it was happening with comics, it was happening with cartoons, Saturday morning cartoons for kids. Started going into video games in the earlier 90s after Mortal Kombat came out. It's all under that umbrella of trying to dictate what art is. And I think we would all agree, like, Stefan, you have, we'll go into this, you have 2 young nieces, correct?
Yeah.
And I have 2 young nieces. Mine are aged, at the time, 3 and 1. So, I mean, they're both very young. But the 3-year-old is old enough to be able to watch certain things and understand them. And, like, you know, do I want her to be able to enjoy Batman? Hell yeah, I do. And I certainly want her to be able to enjoy some of that, like, campiness, like, from the Adam West days, or maybe some Batman the Animated Series episodes that are a bit more lighthearted, I guess. I would like her to enjoy those. Would I want her to read The Cult? No, I would not. There's always a thin line between, you know, what is acceptable, and then, I guess, acceptable for children, but that line, in this case, is very clear that this was not the kind of comic that, you know, they were trying to make for children in general. But that doesn't mean it shouldn't be made, period.
Yeah, I agree. Even to compound on the EC comic part, you know, Stephen King grew up reading those as a kid. So maybe, you know, he shouldn't have, but I'm sure it helped influence him to become who he is today. And we all know Stephen King is a pretty lovable guy. He's got a lot of charisma. So, you know, take from that what you will, but I always think that people should remember, compounding again on what you said earlier, that it was a guy named Frederick Wortham who was the one that went to, you know, the institutes and the government to say, I work with children and teenagers in prisons and jails or, you know, institutes, and they all say they read comic books. So in theory, my thought rationale as a scientist, quote unquote, is that that's the reason why all our children are growing up criminals. The weird part about that is that as soon as they changed everything and they had to get the, you know, Comics Code Authority on every single comic book, and it closed down EC Comics, all those people who needed that work were jobless. After all of that, he kind of rescinded on it because he said, you know, oh, well, you know, I'm going to try and prove it wrong, or I wasn't 100% sure, or so many excuses. That's not to say he was a bad person. It's just that, come on, man, like, if you're going to go to and stop all this from happening, you got to be 100% sure about that. You can't just walk in there and think you're the authority on everything based on a theory. So, yeah, it's pretty sad. Again, yeah, this isn't for kids specifically, although I think most of it would have gone over their head anyway, because it's very much about religious benefactors and messiahs and people who lead other people and exploiting them for financial or sexual or political gains, the religious radical basically. So I'm not sure if kids would have picked up on that. Maybe they would just been like, oh, Batman's hurt, Batman escaped, Batman better, Batman and Robin fight. you know
Maybe.
Not that all kids are cavemen, but it's kids are simple.
They are, but and that's the thing too that really sets this comic apart from many others, is that as simple as it is, because it's a pretty simple story in terms of like actual story events, but the messaging behind it and the implications of it are the things that are far more severe and memorable about it. And I think we should just kind of dive right into it, because it kind of starts in media res with Batman describing how he's got to the point that he is right now, which is not a very good place.
Mm-hmm. It's pretty simple. Basically, the whole part one of this story is Batman has been tied up in the sewer for a week. He's already had a gun wound. He's already been shot in the stomach, basically. And the cult in the underground, the homeless people led by Deacon Blackfire, are feeding him this green ooze. But they're keeping him starved, basically. They're keeping him weak. And the cops have accounted for about 500 people missing from the streets. And the city isn't completely torn on that, because all these pimps and hookers and homeless and all the people they deem unworthy of being in the city are basically the ones that have gone missing. And people are happy about it on the news almost. This kind of leads into the cult of it, because the homeless are people you can prey on. Deacon Blackfire sends them a message that I will lead you to something better. Just believe in me. My word is God. God flows through me. In a way, he is a religious radical. He almost dresses like a priest in a way. He wears the garb. When people think about cults, they think, well, how can people get into a cult? Like, how do they do that? There's a lot of reasons. It's as simple as saying, I'm going to go attend this yoga class. And you like it, and you keep going back. And they said, yes, you must keep coming back. Now you're in a yoga cult. I mean, it really is that simple. The difference is that you feel like you're getting something out of it. You feel like you're part of something. You're in the pressure to conform. Sadly, if you join a yoga cult, you're not serving a sociopathic narcissist.
Well, at least hopefully not.
At least hopefully not, but you can serve some sort of extreme ideology, like, oh, I don't need, like to lift weights or anything. I'm part of the yoga cult. In a way, it just boils down to an extreme ideology, and somebody leading it is usually a crazy person.
Yeah, and this is a good place to start off, because we're going to have some recurring themes about all this stuff that come up throughout the entirety of this story. Cults themselves, like you say, they strive for conformity amongst their members. And this speaks a lot to the human condition of certain things, where as much as we say that we enjoy freedom, especially in America, there is this, I guess, part of our mind, whether it be active or subconscious, is actually looking for structure. Part of this comes from the desire to have knowledge of things, or to know things, or to try to understand. And that desire for understanding can lead people to go through a lot of mental gymnastics, some of which are absolutely absurd. Like, for example, there are some people who can't wrap their heads around the fact like something like 9/11 could have happened. And in order to try to gain a sense of understanding about that, they are willing to subscribe to conspiracy theories that lead them down this rabbit hole of, it was done by the U.S. government, or it was an inside job, things like that. because it helps them to understand a situation that is so unlike anything somebody's faced. It helps make things add up more in their mind. It's not necessarily the right conclusion in general, but it's the right conclusion for them. And that's just like based off of one event. So imagine when people are looking for answers to life, like, why are we here? What is our purpose? Trying to find some sort of an understanding for that. For grand questions like that, no wonder certain people will turn to religion, since religion, not necessarily spirituality, but religion, can offer up answers to complex things in a simplified way. And some people can get so wrapped up in that they kind of lose their perspective, and they get into this kind of a tunnel vision.
Right. One of the easy things, again, about religion and Deacon Blackfire in this is he kind of represents a lot of people we've seen in the real world, especially people who now are known as, or were known as, cult leaders. And usually how it works with them is, they say, everybody else is wrong and I am right. Everything else is fake and evil and corrupt, and they try to invoke this fear within people. And what it creates, it's a scientific term, is cognitive dissonance.
Mm-hmm.
And what that is where you lose all reasoning, and your perception of reality has changed. And that is exactly what happens in the world all the time. And it doesn't even have to be a political thing. It doesn't have to be a sexual thing, a financial thing. It could be the smallest thing.
Yeah, I mean, perfect example of like when cognitive dissonance applies. You can see this all the time in crime cases where a family member does something terrible, and like they'll talk to somebody, or you'll hear like if they interview a parent, it's like, I can't believe that my child did this. They're innocent. They're being framed. This was the police did it. Somebody else did it. The evidence was planted. They got the wrong person. Anything, because in their mind they cannot reconcile the image that they have or the knowledge they have of their offspring versus the factual evidence that's being presented. You can see that happen a lot. Some people don't subscribe to that, and they realize, well, they got his fingerprints, his blood's on the scene, they got it on camera. Like, hey, he's guilty, dead to rights. Some people can do that, but others can't reconcile it. And that is not a sign of like mental weakness necessarily, because everybody processes things differently. But it is something that you have to be aware of, so you can try to fight back against it. And I think it happens to all of us, where we can't believe that something is happening, and some of us are able to like get past that better than others.
Correct. And how it applies to Batman specifically, because we have to remember, Batman, for the longest time now, seems like he's the guy with all the answers. Nothing can ever break him. He's the guy who, even on a team of superheroes, watches his fellow superheroes just in case one day they don't have control over their powers and they're taken advantage of. He's that guy. He has the answers to everything. But back in the day, one of the great things about writers and Batman growing up is that sometimes he did break. Sometimes he did lose really badly. It's harsh. And this is one of those moments where, going back to the sewer, Batman tied up, he's seeing all these weak-minded individuals who want answers, the homeless, everyone. One of the things he sees while he's going through this transformation is he sees a hooker come up to him, and she takes off a mask she has on, much like in Batman 89. She is just cut up in the face. She's beaten to a pulp. She explains that her pimp did all of this to her, and she believes in Deacon Blackfire because he brought her to this quote-unquote paradise and enlightened her. And at the same time, Batman also gets enlightened by Deacon Blackfire, who injects him with something to make him have hallucinations and think that he actually is some sort of messiah, to which we all know he isn't.
No, he is certainly not. And like when you say when Batman has all the answers, and that's one of the things that we identify about him, Batman is still only human. And a lot of what is being done to him by Blackfire is stuff that would affect somebody on a human level, to where there's only so much you can do when it comes to physiological reactions to things. Batman's hurt, in the sense of, he's, like you said, he's been shot, so he's, been losing blood. He has not had that wound properly treated. It's bandaged, but it's not properly treated. He is being deprived of nutrients. He is probably being kept awake for constant stretches of time. Probably being allowed to sleep only long enough to keep him alive. He's certainly being fed the bare minimum to keep him alive, and even then the food is probably rancid. And then, on top of all that, he's being drugged. No matter how resolute he is mentally, there is no way that any human being on Earth would be able to go through all of that and maintain a normal mental state.
Mm-hmm. And they even show in one little scene, too, by one of the thugs of Blackfire, that when he questions the teachings of the Deacon, that he gets a hot rod tortured and burned onto his skin. So he's also being tortured a little bit here by just the people around him. And that can also lead to just, God, what else could they do to him,
Yeah, I mean, most people, as we see easily, broke well before Batman broke. So this is still very much the Batman that we know, but just having him pushed to an extreme that not even Bane put him through. I mean, Bane just did a breaking of his body with, the very famous back to the knee. So we know what Bane is capable of, and we see that happen years later from here. But this is a completely different kind of a mental break. This is easily just the sheer embodiment of humanity being destroyed by somebody, depriving them of all the things that are necessary for life, and then destroying a person's mental fortitude.
Yeah, one of the things that Batman goes through in this is he almost doesn't even know where he is at some points. Because once the Deacon enlightens him and shows him this huge, what would you call it, Webb? It's a pagoda?
Maybe?
It's like this huge...
atrium, maybe?
Yeah, and basically Batman has a hallucination. And when he kind of awakens from all the hallucinating and everything, he realizes that he's in a room full of dead mobsters. And that the cult has killed the mob. Again, this is all to get Deacon Blackfire to be the guy with all the answers. He is ridding the city of evil. And the people that follow him are starting to see this, even though they're the ones doing the killing for him. Deacon Blackfire has nothing to do with this. He's just chilling down in the sewers. But at the same time, Batman is starting to come to the rationale that, yeah, he is cleaning up the city. The evil is being vanquished. And in doing so, he's starting to be left on his own. He's not tied up anymore. He's able to just sit there with the rest of the believers. He keeps mumbling to himself, I need food. I need these things. They're not giving it to me, but somehow I'm still just sitting here dealing with it, being enlightened and being part of the group. One of the guys named Ratface wants Batman to go up and help him kill somebody who he says is a pimp. And Batman believes him, he sees a pimp. But in all reality, it's just this guy Ratface's neighbor. And that's how deep into this Batman already is. But he realizes in the middle of it, in the heat of it, that's not... he can't agree to violence. He can't subscribe to it. So he tries to break free and stop him. And he even takes out a cop while doing it.
Yeah. Even before all that happens, when Ratface drags him out, we have a scene where Batman finds himself in the middle of, like you said, the mob, and we don't know if Batman has killed people, because Batman hallucinates him shooting the Joker, or is it Two-Face, one of them, and then seeing that body turn into Commissioner Gordon, making him think that he's killed Commissioner Gordon, and then when he finally snaps out of the hallucination, he's just there having done the Deacon's work, so to say. Did Batman kill under the influence of that hallucinating, and the drugs? Did he kill under the influence of the cult?
Mm-hmm. It's very ambiguous.
And that's meant to rattle us as a reader, since obviously we know that, normally Batman doesn't kill villains unless you have a Zack Snyder interpretation of it. But Batman doesn't kill. But here he is, possibly having killed, potentially innocent people who didn't pose any kind of a threat. It's it's scary that that's what he had, been subjected to. But at the same time, not unheard of by what is even on a normal basis, what people can be brainwashed into doing under certain conditions.
Right. And we all remember the Manson murders. Those people were brainwashed into going up into the Hollywood Hills and killing people. Again, it's not that far from a reality. We've talked about how hard it was for Batman to survive in the situation he was in, and even after all that happens, he's now broken away, and he's still, under the brainwash and the illusion that Deacon, like, he might be punished for this because he wants to please the Deacon, yet his survival instincts kick in, and he breaks a window in the street because he sees food, and he needs nourishment. And even after he eats a little bit, he heads to Central Park, and there's this very cool sequence of panels where it shows him just stumbling around, and slowly his costume like drips off of him, his flesh drips off of him until he's bones, and then he goes into ash. And that's basically showing, look, he's done for unless he figures something out. And in the heat of that, he sees two good people in the park with a picnic basket. They're going to go hang out and smooch a little bit probably. And he just goes into an animal-like mode. He just says, rah, and just jumps out of the bush. And they drop the picnic basket and run away. And he just starts chowing down because he's got to eat.
Yeah, and it doesn't take very long once he actually starts getting food into his system for his cognition to start to come back, at least enough to realize more of what's happening. Because he's just been deprived nutrients. Now that his body is starting to respond to it, like, slowly he's starting to, like, come back into a functioning in quotation marks, because he's still not near the condition Batman needs to be in. And we're going to see him get very sloppy later on, too, with things that he's doing. But at least it's starting to help him function enough to like, put things back into perspective and realize what's been happening. And that's what Batman needed at that point in time, is just to be able to get his finger grip back into reality.
Mm-hmm. And behind the scenes of this, Jason Todd, the second Robin, is talking with Commissioner Gordon, and they're going over the fact that Batman's been gone for this long, and they don't know why. And the news is speculating that Deacon Blackfire and Batman may be working together to rid the city of crime. So what Robin does is he's heard about the underground, and he decides to go down there and infiltrate it and see if he can find anything, especially Batman.
Yeah, and this is something that kind of is going to be the starting point of the problem that we're going to have with the public versus the police, because the public knows Batman as a figure that works outside the bounds of the law and gets results. But the police kind of tolerate him because Batman follows a certain code of ethics. So, in a way, it's not a healthy thing for people to be able to see that, taking matters outside the bounds of the law, outside the bounds of what, like, these people that we put into office can do for us, or these people we trust. We can't trust the system. Batman's already indicative of that, and now he's working with Deacon Blackfire, which is adding more fuel to that black fire, that you can't trust the system. We need an outsider.
Exactly. The way that Deacon Blackfire works this to his advantage is he says, the police and the city is against us, and our might is right, which is totally delusional and crazy, and please don't ever follow anyone who ever says that. Batman, having gotten back to the sewers, though, while all this is going on, he finds that the Deacon himself has basically made himself rich, and he's living in luxury down in the sewers, and he's conned all of his followers, which is not surprising, because if you look at any cult leader, it's always worked the same way.
Always.
And it's sad because the cult leader at some point will even say, I need more to do whatever it is, my spiritual powers or gathering or awakening, or, I need more. And enough will never be enough. They'll always say, I need more.
But yeah, we see this happen with, like, for instance, the Rajneesh cult, that tried to poison people with salmonella in one of the worst biological attacks on American soil. Their leaders were living the life of luxury. And we even see this with evangelicals. And I'm not trying to say that Christianity is a cult, mind you. I'm not applying that, though technically all religions are cults because it's a group of people believing in the same things. So yeah, it's all religions are cults in that sense. But in the terms of the negative connotation of a cult, these specific evangelical leaders would profit immensely off of donations from people who felt that giving these donations would help lead to, I guess, getting closer to God or supporting the church and therefore supporting God by proxy. It always happens. There's even that one guy, I think it was Oral Roberts, who was evangelical, who said that he was going to die if people didn't give. Like, he had a vision that he was going to die unless he received like a certain amount of money. Mm-hmm. And people didn't want Oral Roberts to die. It's like, no, God, don't take him. He's your disciple. Why would you do this? We got to give money. And they gave. And the guy's a piece of shit scumbag. And I think he's dead now. Hope he's dead. That sounded harsh.
Yeah, no, you're not too far from that. It might have even been him or somebody else. I can't remember. There was a evangelical leader who said, hey, I have one plane on my landing strip that I own, and I really need two. So if you can donate this week, my followers, I can help spread the word greater with two planes, even though I only have one plane. Yes. It's like, oh, okay, I guess you do need two planes to spread the word of God. That sounds bulletproof.
Yeah, here we go. It says here on Wikipedia that Roberts' fundraising was controversial. In January of '87, during a fundraising drive, Roberts announced to a television audience that unless he raised $8 million by that March, God would call him home. So, but previously, he had said at a Dallas convention center that God instructed him to raise the money by the end of the year or he would die.
Wow. Did he die and raise the money? One or the other?
Well, he did eventually die. But not related to that. He died in 2009. But he did raise $9.1 million. So,
Jesus. Wow. It takes a lot of loss of moral conscience and moral fiber to be that cold-blooded. I could never see myself doing that. That's wicked, people.
And apparently according to this, when he was economically, things were getting rough, he continued to wear Italian silk suits, diamond rings, gold bracelets, and they were airbrushed out of his publicity pictures by staff members. So this ties right into exactly what we see from Blackfire, where he is trying to hide his wealth at all costs, because if he doesn't, it's going to break the illusion of who he is. And that illusion, that image, is very important to some people. And, that ties into the criticisms we have of, the white Jesus kind of a mythos. Since any science will tell you that, given the proximity of the world in which Christ was born, he would not have white alabaster skin. But that image is so important to some people that cognitive dissonance kicks in. They can't think of it another way. And I'll be honest, when I picture Jesus, I picture the Buddy Christ from Dogma.
2 thumbs up.
Yeah, see, it's what happens. It's the way that image gets instilled into your head, and I can tell myself rationally, because, I'm going to be fair here. I have spiritual beliefs. I'm not an atheist, so I'm not trying to attack people who believe in a higher power when I talk about any of this stuff. And I know the same from you, Stefan. We would never criticize people for believing in any kind of spirituality that is not harmful to other people in terms of, well, my God tells me I got to drain the blood of the virgins.
Yeah, when it comes to me and Webb, being mindful and respectful of other people's beliefs, I think is just part of our core values. Me personally, I am an agnostic. And what that means for me, the definition of an agnostic, is someone who neither denies or believes in God. I'm more of if God's real, cool. If he's not, cool. It's not going to affect me either way, because at this point, in a logical stance, I don't see a God present, and I know what you have to do to believe in God. So I can keep the faith, but I don't see any God. So it doesn't mean that he's real or not. I just don't know if he is. And by that, if other people do believe in him, good on them.
Yeah, and for the most part, most people who have these spiritual beliefs will not, go on to some like psychotic rampage or try to start up a cult that's gonna bring people into the fold of wanting to mass murder and all that stuff. It's not the way it is. But some people can be very easily led to extremes by their devotion and their wanting to understand the world and try to get a feel for it. And sadly, there are people who are predators to that, and that doesn't even extend to just religion too. That extends to other things as well. It can be political. There are people who, and actually Blackfire mentions this later on in the comics, that he's tried other things to gain control over people. He tried crime, ended up in prison for it, according to him. He tried politics, but it was too, I guess, volatile for him to be able to gain actual control. And then he found the source that would really do it was religion. But you can get that control over people in other ways. And sadly, this is one of the things that's scary about this book, is that there's some political ties that you can make from this to present day 2020 America.
Mm-hmm. One side of the line of people, the rationale for some people on the news clips in the comic book is that they think he's doing amazing things by clearing the streets, and he's doing all these, he's not corrupt in any way. And other people are saying, it's blatantly obvious how corrupt of a man he is, and he's conning you the whole time into this, again, cognitive dissonance, which, I mean, if you read the comic book, that person isn't wrong.
It's scary, man, because that echoes things that have been said in the last 4 years in this country.
That's true. Whether you believe Deacon Blackfire, having tried all those things before, you're thinking, well, how did he do that in one life? Sure, he's got old hair, he's got white hair, he's older. It does depict that the Deacon, at some point, all his followers who have died, he's bathing in their blood to gain everlasting life. Because we have to remember this is a comic book. And Commissioner Gordon does ask Robin before he heads into the sewer, or I think it might be after, he asks for files on Deacon Blackfire because he wants to learn more about him. And they just have a boatload of files. And they date all the way back to the 1920s, which leads even more to the fact that maybe the Deacon has lived for quite some time.
Right. Though at the same time, they also think that it's possible, because, got to look at this from a rational perspective too, that they mentioned, well, maybe it's his father or somebody with the same name, familial. Because I'm not a doctor, Stefan. I am not a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say that I am medically certain, to 100% of a degree, that bathing in the blood of dead people once every moon cycle will not grant you eternal life, and may in fact cause more infections than you realize.
I mean, we could try it out if anyone wants to donate some. No, I'm just kidding.
Don't do that, because if it's because popular, then it's yes, they will donate their blood. They already gave to Oral Roberts. They're going to give to us now.
Please do not drink my joking Kool-Aid. I promise. I'm just kidding. Do not send me blood. I got plenty. I got pints.
There'll just be a disclaimer at the end of every podcast. Now, please do not send blood to the participants of this podcast. And it makes you do have to wonder whether or not there was anything spiritual about the Deacon, in terms of, I say spiritual, I should say paranormal about the Deacon.
Mm-hmm.
Because everything else in this comic is in the realm of the real. And that's where Batman often deals with. Now, mind you, in other comics, Batman has dealt with the more fantastical elements. He is friends with Zatanna, who is a magician, not just a stage magician, but actually controls magic. He has teamed up and fought against Etrigan the Demon, so you got that going for him. So he is not immune to the world of those things. But when you have a trade paperback or a story like The Cult, they're often somewhat self-contained. and that the stories are not necessarily in the chronology of the Batman character itself, or what we would see through his Detective Comics run or Batman comics, anything like that. So liberties can be taken with stories like this. And one of the things you have to ask yourself is this comic truly set in a world where magic does not exist? Because if it does, then the Deacon has no power. But if it's outside of that, and it is in the realm of where the magical can happen, then it is quite possible that the Deacon, at least in some way, shape, or form, himself is kind of a mystical entity, but is using more like tactile, physical ways of controlling people.
Right. One of the things to point out when Batman comes back to the sewers and finds all this out, and he's hauled off basically against his will to this, I forget what they call it. I think they call it the baths or something, but they basically take him to where all the dead bodies are, all the people who, either probably turned on the Deacon or just had to be executed for some reason just to give him his blood. He's left there, and Robin is following along under, garb and decoy so that he looks like one of them. One of the things to notice about the comic book as it goes on and as it starts out is that Batman looks very frail.
Yes.
And he looks very skinny, and just even his facial expressions, he just looks like I have no idea what's going on. And as the comic goes on and Batman gets more back to Batman, his muscles start to pop. He starts to get a little stronger. His face is more geared towards feelings of his own. He's no longer in anguish. He's more angry, and he feels robbed of his emotions. And you see that over Bernie Wrightson's art through the comic book, which I think if people go in reading this, try to remember that, because it's actually a transformation you wouldn't notice otherwise unless you were paying attention.
Yeah, it's a remarkably good point. And we even get to see Batman try to improve on himself psychologically through it too, because he needs to prepare himself to go back into battle. There's a couple moments where, Jason Todd is going to die, and not by a crowbar and an explosion either. He's literally going to be killed by these cultists, either ripped apart or stabbed or a number of things. And Bats has to shake himself out of this kind of a mental lock that he's in order to get back to work to save him. He has to exert that mental energy that it takes to fight these people. And once he gets into that groove, once he starts actually entering combat, he's just as fierce as he ever was. And you can see in one particular exchange where he's just splayed out 15 to 16 members of this cult, just bashing their heads in and everything. And it's great seeing him be able to summon that back up. But it takes a lot. It takes almost the death of Robin to have that happen.
Yeah, one of the greatest things that I always appreciate about comics, too, is that when they include Robin to some degree where he is the one championing Batman when Batman can't, that's what the sidekick is there for. So in this comic book, they do that. And like you said, when Robin's starting to become overwhelmed, because, at the end of the day, he is a kid... Batman does wake up out of his haze, leaps into action. Right after they escape the sewers together, Batman specifically says, I don't know if I can take back the city. I might have to give up on it. He's questioning himself. He's still, I assume, coming down from the drugs, and he makes it back to Wayne Manor, where he's taking a couple days rest. He's getting his functions back, and he has this dream about his parents and them getting killed, and that's what snaps him back to reality. That's the thing that is always going to be the reason why he's Batman and brings him back to his moral center.
Yeah, and this is after he flees Gotham, thinking that he can't save it. He does obviously end up going back. It doesn't end on that note. It's just not well, we tried, and that's where it wraps up. He does go back. And I'll be honest, though, I think that the fourth part is the weakest part of the series. I feel like we have, I don't know, just the whole thing of he rigs the Batmobile out to be like a monster truck with these massive tires so that he can go over all these reinforcements that Deacon Blackfire's group have put in front of the city. They destroyed all but one bridge. So it's the only way in, and, Batman just, beefs out the Batmobile, so it's bullet resistant, all this stuff. But apparently it's still very maneuverable, so you can dodge rockets, and they outfit it with a turret gun that shoots tranquilizer darts. It seems a little contrived that it would be that effective at getting through everything. Obviously we had to take liberties with the fact it's a comic, but this is where I don't want to say it loses me, but I feel like it's become far more of a comic book solution to a non-comic book problem, if that makes sense.
Right. I think a good substitute would be just Batman using his knowledge of the sewers and sneaking in and taking out Deacon one-on-one rather than using, all this loud combat. But I guess in a way, when I think about it, we have to remember Deacon has an army of over 500 people. I mean, he's like Bane again in Dark Knight Rises. He's taken over the city in some aspects. And the police are going to have to stand their ground against that. And they, if anyone knows anything about most major cities, there's usually about 20,000 police, again, in an open mob of people coming out of the sewers, and you don't know where they're going to attack from. That could prove difficult. You would never cleanse them specifically either if you went down into the sewers, because you wouldn't know where you were going. You could be attacked from so many places. So it really is left up to Batman. I agree with you. It is contrived. It's very comic booky. It's definitely not the best part. The Batmobile part specifically, when Batman does get into the sewers, though, it does start to pick up a little bit when they use the tranquilizer darts to take people out.
Yeah, it's a lot better once they're out of the Batmobile and back in the sewers, because the final confrontation with Deacon Blackfire is pretty fantastic.
Yeah, this is, again, as you were saying earlier, all the way at the beginning, that they use these yellow backgrounds of light now that Batman has seen the light and he's ready to take on the Deacon. So it's, again, the colors are displaying the emotions of the characters, or the main character in this way. And, if you didn't pay attention to them, subconsciously maybe you are, but, it's there. It's all there.
It is, and Batman smartly, this is one of those things where Batman won't kill kind of comes into play, because Batman's policy of not killing pretty heavily here, where he's tempted to kill, very tempted to kill Blackfire. He really wants to do it. But he, obviously being Batman, doesn't do it, which enrages Blackfire, because he wanted to die a martyr. He wanted to die as a messiah, because, as he put it, that's how it's fated to end, so that he can live on forever, because he was killed, he was struck down, so he'll become a legend. And
right.
He wants that to close out his arc, so that he knows he's won. And he'll die knowing that he's won. But Batman refuses to give that to him, and decides to just do everything that he can to attack Blackfire to the point where he weakens him, to just beg him to stop, because a messiah that was supposed to be all-powerful like this would not beg for Batman to stop.
Right, and this might be one of those few rare occasions where Batman knows that he's literally beating a guy to a pulp on purpose. Mm-hmm. The followers of the Deacon see all this. They're witnessing this. It's taking place in their arena, in the underground. They turn on him. And Batman knows that he can't stop the whole mob, so he just tells Robin, look, let's hang back and let's get out of here, because there's nothing we can do.
Yeah, he's willing to... even if there was something they could do, at this point in time, Batman's not going to save him. It's just screw it. He's dead. This is kind of like a different take on something that one of the most memorable scenes to me from the DC animated universe was when Superman goes to fight Darkseid after Superman's been brainwashed, and it's just livid that Darkseid killed Dan. I almost said Lieutenant Dan, but killed Lieutenant Dan. Darkseid, you killed Lieutenant Dan, Darkseid.
No, just joined the call, Lieutenant Dan.
No, but he kills, not the police chief, but I guess one of the captains. Killed him. Turpin, I think it's Dan Turpin, if I remember correctly. But Darkseid kills him. Superman, finally gets his revenge, and is beating Darkseid to a bloody pulp, and then throws him down to the ground to let the people of Apocalypse do what they will. And they carry him, and they restore him to the throne. And, Superman is astonished by this, and Darkseid looks at him and goes, I have many things, but to them I am God. And it's because it's all they've ever known is living in subjugation to Darkseid. But these people here, and this is what changes things, Blackfire is not all that they have ever known. They knew what a life was like before this. They knew how confused they were, how terrible their life was, and they've been lied to about it all. Mm-hmm. And that denial and that veil of confusion that they had just gets shattered through by this rage they feel for knowing they've been conned into thinking that they had an answer, to thinking that life was okay now, that they'd figured it out. And then, no, just to have it all ripped apart, no wonder they ripped him apart.
Yeah, pretty brutal. That's kind of where the story ends, really. I mean, Batman goes back to being Batman, and Bruce Wayne and, you know, the Batman and Robin kind of just hang out in the Batcave. They eat their bat cereal and everything, you know. But I think we should all take away from this, again, you know, the teachings of the cult and cults in general. You know, you should always be questioning everything. I mean, don't question everything to the point of looking like a lunatic and believing in things that are obviously not real and impossible. But, like, do detective work. Be like Batman. You know, whatever's left out of deducing everything must be the truth, as Batman would put it. So, you know, just use rational thinking. Don't try to make something without any proof.
And to give Batman credit for that, too, in him, obviously he's very resolute in his beliefs, but at the very end, he goes back to the totem that was supposed to be kind of the spiritual source of Blackfire's power. And he finds the totem, and he sets fire to it. And he does it because he just does not want to take any chances, in case that something was valid about his supernatural power. Doesn't want to take any chances of it, burns the totem down. And it's one of those very Batman-like things, because now he's back to being Batman. Mm-hmm. Of not going to take any chances. There's things that exist beyond my understanding, and I am not going to think that I have all the answers. I am going to play it safe here and do something that I think would be the thing to do to protect myself and this city in case he actually does have some spiritual presence.
Deacon Blackfire himself has actually only appeared in the comics 2 or 3 times, I think. He came back for the Black Lantern Corps, and then he came back closer to Batman issue 1000, I believe. The thing that people outside of comic books would know him from is that he appears in the video game Batman Arkham Knight. And he is, I believe, in a caged coliseum around what would be basically Batman's version of the Statue of Liberty in Gotham City in the video game. And again, he still has followers. He's still the same character. So he's not a character that's been around a lot in the comic books or outside of them. He's been used very rarely.
Yeah, and I think that's kept best. There's certain villains that work in very specific places, and if they ever need to really call on him for something, he hasn't been overused to the point where, yeah, it might not be a bad idea to use him at this point in time. At the same time, we already have somebody a bit similar with that whole, like, you know, constantly coming back from the dead bit. Because at some point in time when I heard that, oh, well, he's like, you know, all these years old, I thought, well, okay, what Lazarus pit did he find, and did he tell Ra's al Ghul about it too?
Yeah. Speaking of Lazarus pits, the character of Jason Todd in this story would die not too long afterwards, and that would lead into a death in the family. So this story took place around a lot of other bigger stories as well. You know, the 80s was definitely ripe for huge stories, not just in Batman, but all of comic books. So there's a lot of cool bits in here just to see Jason Todd being Robin, a good Robin, you know.
Yeah, he's actually very good in this, and it makes me wonder, like, what we're missing out on from, like, individual comics that I haven't read, to where people were like, well, if we can vote to kill Jason Todd, I'm voting to kill that motherfucker.
I need that hotline number. Yep.
Like, how bad was he that people were just like, kill him? Fucking kill him.
Apparently it was close match. I think it was like the difference between 100 or something, or 200 votes. Like, it was real close, whether to keep him or not. So some people appreciated him, and some just outright hated him.
Still, it's kind of a drastic step to where you would think, well, I don't like him as Robin, but we shouldn't kill him off, and then just like almost 50% of the rest of them were just not kill him. Nope, just kill him. Don't care, kill him. And that's a little harsh, man.
That's super harsh.
Well, like, wasn't there a third option? Like, can we just get a different Robin, but you can still, like, keep him alive? And everybody, no, kill him, kill him, kill him.
Yeah, they couldn't have just like he couldn't have just broke a leg and been paralyzed or something, and then they bring in a female Robin or a different looking Robin, because all the Robins look exactly the same. Frank Miller's even been quoted like, if you kill a Robin, who cares? There's like an army of Robins. They all look the same. It's just kill Robins left and right. Why not?
Or one of my favorite lines in Kevin Smith's Quiver, there's a scene where, I don't want to spoil too much for people who haven't seen it, but there's a scene where they're in a location, and Ollie sees Robin in the background swinging by. Is that Robin? And the response is, yeah, one of them.
I totally forgot about that. Yep, that's true.
It's a great line.
I almost laughed earlier when you brought up Jason Blood.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, oh, he's thinking of Quiver right now. I know it.
Well, Etrigan is one of my favorite comic book characters, period. There's a particular Batman the Animated Series episode that introduced me to Etrigan. It was from the final season they did, the Gotham Knights series, as it's referred to. Though I just kind of call it like Batman Animated Series Season 4. He appears in the episode The Demon Within, and he's voiced by Billy Zane. And that was my introduction to Jason Blood and Etrigan. And I love the fact that the episode is just pure batshit crazy. Batshit crazy. Because it's Batman. It just, every other episode for the most part, just in Batman dealt with, more grounded foes. Like, oh, here's a guy with a Tommy gun. Or here's, Mr. Freeze, he's got his freeze gun, okay. Or we're going to deal with, like, a criminal from, like, the mob today, or Rupert Thorne. And then it's like, no, we got a demon this time, and people using magic. And Batman just, like, it fucking adapts to it. Like, nothing phases him. He's just doing magic incantations, fighting things off. Because you can just do it, because he's Batman. He's used to this shit. And meanwhile, the Robin sitting there, it's just like, I have no idea what the hell is going on. And that's one of the things that I just really liked about that episode was showing Batman's resourcefulness for dealing with shit that's just completely out of the realm of what he should normally be dealing with. But the guy comes prepared for everything.
Yeah, he sure does. That's Batman.
There's still a lot of different themes that are at play with the cult. And that's what makes this so memorable. It's not so much the actual story beats, because they're very basic story beats.
Mm-hmm.
But between the artwork, the violence, I mean, there's a guy who's decapitated, there's a newscaster who's shot in the head, and we get the blood splatter on the camera. Like, it's a graphic comic, for sure. Mm-hmm. Very graphic. But it's the themes behind it, and what it represents that last well long after you finish reading it.
Yeah, again, real-world aspects. People in this book that are political figures that don't agree with the Deacon are threatened and killed. Again, stuff that happens today, a lot of political figures are threatened. Not specifically killed. I mean, that has happened before as well in the past. So, there's a lot of stuff in here that you can take away that doesn't specifically, if you're not a comic book reader, it's definitely worth a read still. You're not reading it, again, for the story. It's just what it's trying to convey. So, the art as well. I mean, Bernie Wrightson, going back, they picked the perfect guy to do this. A horror artist. He just did a phenomenal job.
He really did. This is just such a wonderfully rich comic in the art, in the depiction of it. I love, again, some of these could be watercolor paintings with how everything blends together. Like, this is some Bob Ross violence going on here. Like, even in the early pages where you get to see, I mean, it's not like pointillism by any means, but the way that the blood specks form all over him, And you can see like the mixtures of the blues and grays on Batman's suit. It really is. It's beautiful. It's raw. It's almost dirty, I think, because of some of the ways that the colors blend into each other. It gives it this kind of like dirty appearance, if you will. But again, it's dirty, and it just lends so much to it. Like I'm looking on one of the pages where we see a close up of Batman's face after he's been so tortured and like seeing the light. And you can see these, like, where normally you'd have, like, a peach-colored skin, you have these caked lines of blue and gray, almost like mold, almost like human mold growing on his face.
Mm-hmm.
And, again, it's dirty. It just doesn't look clean. And that's the point. Like, there's not a lot of clean in this, whether it be the setting is unclean, the people are unclean. It's a dirty comic, and the artwork reflects that as much as the story does. It's beautiful.
Yeah, you're not wrong. There's even a comparison on the same page where Batman, before he was in the sewers, he does have that peach face. So you're not wrong at all. And even the characters, the only one who doesn't look dirty is the Deacon. He looks completely clean and fine and dandy.
Well, I mean, that's how I like my Batman, clean and dandy.
And Randy. Sorry.
There's no Randy Wayne.
We don't know that.
I'm Bruce. This is my cousin Randy. Randy Wayne.
That's like how you find out that James Franco has a brother named Dave. Dave Franco? Okay. That doesn't sound like a real thing.
No, granted, Dave Franco is kind of a very dull name, but, you know, whatever.
Yeah, but would you recommend this comic, Web?
Like when we talked about, and we just never got to air, but we talked about Watchmen, you and I, before.
Mm-hmm.
And with Watchmen, that was a comic that's a hard read in the sense of it deals with some very tough issues. This is not a fun comic to read. It's an interesting and powerful comic to read and to appreciate for the artwork. I would recommend it wholeheartedly for what it represents and for the fact that it is a beautiful piece of artwork. It is violent art at its finest. So I do recommend it for that. But this is not one of those ones I would pull off the shelf to be like, hey, it's a good day today. What am I going to read today? Oh, Batman the Cult. Let's have some fun. It doesn't really fall into that category for me.
Yeah, that's fair. I would agree with that. You know, I have had Watchmen on my shelf for well over 10 years, and I think I've read it twice in that time. And not because it's a bad comic book, again, going back to what you said, but it's definitely, if you're in the mood for something political, religious, it's not something you're going to pick up again all the time. Just like you said, I would agree with all of that. My only stance on it is if you don't feel like reading, but you want to look at good art, 100% you could open this up at any time. This would be a great inspiration for anyone, any artist, anyone who likes to paint or who wants to be a colorist in comic books. You could do 100%. Pick this up anytime, look at it. Please do. If you've liked what we've said about the comic book on the religious and political aspects of it, then maybe pick it up for that reason. Other than that, I couldn't recommend it outside of those things because it's a Batman story. It does not correlate with anything else. It's not, like you said, Webb, it's not a happy comic book. It's just, it is what it is.
Now, I will say that if you're trying to find this comic online, because if you're somebody who's interested in having a physical copy of it, and I can't blame you if you are, but that's where you're going to run into some issues. If you look at Amazon for this, prices for the trade paperback seem to start around $49 used. And mind you, this is a very good comic, but I would not pay $49 for it. You can probably find the individual issues cheaper. If you look on eBay, I'm doing a live lookup for everybody right now, so that you have an indication of what to look for here. When I look up Batman the Cult there, you can find the individual comics on sale right now for around $20, and there's a couple others, the graphic novels. One is going for $31, but it's being bid on, so that's probably going to increase. But then, again, separate issues for around $25. So, if you're going to try to find this, find it in the individual issues. Good luck trying to find a trade paperback for a fair price. That's going to hurt you.
Yeah, maybe your local comic shop, too, could find it for cheaper. They could order it for you, call around and figure that out. I got mine at my record store. It's called Zia Records. I'm not being paid for any promotions here, but I just love shopping there. And I got the individual issues for $3 each. So if you look around, you could probably find it offline for cheaper, or hit up your local comic shop.
Which is something that we should say more often. Always hit up your local comic shop. You are always going to find prices better there because they tend to sell for exactly what that comic is worth from the printing on the comic for what it was worth. So this copy that I have, which again was made back in 91, it's got the sticker price in the back of $19.99. And if you were to go to any comic shop that's like a licensed comic shop, they're not going to sell it for more than that because they don't really sell for more than the sticker price unless it's something like, exceedingly rare. But you can generally find things that are for what price that they should be on those comics.
Yeah. I mean, we should, like you said, let's clarify that, especially because it's, if they have Avengers issue 1.
Oh, of course, yeah.
They're not going to sell it for the 50 cents or whatever it was in the 60s. Obviously,
No.
They're going to sell it for the thousands it's worth. But you are right. They will do a trade paperback at face value.
Yeah. It's, again, certain issues, certain things, holy hell, yeah, you're not going to find them for the sticker price. But a majority of, like, trade paperbacks or just standard issues, if you're trying to like track down like an issue from like whatever happened to like that mid '90s Batman issue where it was introducing Victor Zsasz. It's like, oh, we can track that down for you, and you're probably not going to be looking at paying like $500 for the issue or something.
Right, but like we're gonna head out of here right now. But before we do, again, just support your local comic book shops. They need that money so badly, especially right now with everything going on. I'm not going to try and date the episode by saying what it is. Everyone knows at this point. But they need that help. Even in the future, I'm sure they'll still need your support. So go support your local comic shop.
Indeed. So that wraps up another episode of Crypt of the Unknown. We do thank you very much for listening, and there will be more to follow. Please leave your comments, suggestions, reviews in the comment section here, or you can reach me at Critical Android on Twitter or thecriticalandroid@gmail.com. And I'll, of course, share any feedback with Steph and JD that you would like to have shared. And we just really appreciate you listening.
And you can also find me on Instagram at Cyberpunk Holiday.
So for the both of us, thank you very much for being a part of this program. We look forward to bringing you more. So for both Steph and JD and myself, Webb the Critical Android, we wish you the best. And for the time being, the Crypt is closed.